Rhythm is the maverick in the musical toolbox. Of all music's components, rhythm is the most independent. Even without a melody, a bass line or harmony, a rhythmic pattern can stand on its own 2 feet. Rhythm is the part of music that interacts most immediately and spontaneously with our bodies. Without it, music would be pleasant enough, but it would be brain food. With rhythm, though, music becomes hypnotic and sensuous. What is it about rhythm that makes it so irresistible? Why do we surrender to it so easily? In this program, I'm going to put it under the microscope. We're going to find out how rhythm works.
Mother, stand strong. You can make it whether you with them or your man's gone. And I wish I could give every celly some commissary and a popo bring the heat on a piece like that did.
Different music from different places and different times, but they all share the same appeal. They all make us want to tap our feet, get up and dance, and sway to the beat. Rhythm is addictive and intoxicating, but it can also be fantastically complex, and we're going to explore its many forms in this program. At its core, though, there's one simple and fundamental ingredient.
At the heart of all rhythm lies the concept of the beat, or the pulse. Our first sensation of pulse, of course, was that of our mother's heartbeat in the womb. But all mammals experience their mother's heartbeat, and only we humans like to dance, tap our feet, or play the castanets. It now seems more plausible that the key rhythmic moment for us Homo sapiens was when we got up off our knees, hands, and backsides and started to walk on just our 2 hind legs. So having established our basic beat with our 2 feet, we can of course alter the pulse by speeding it up or slowing it down. In music, speed has an Italian name, tempo. When you see words like andante, largo, allegro, or presto to describe a piece of music, these are all indications of how fast or slow the pulse should be. The tempo of our pulse may depend on our mood, our energy level, our level of coolness, our sense of urgency, excitement, or fear. Most of the most popular speeds of music are associated with various forms of forward movement: shuffling, lolloping, jogging, hopping, pouncing, marching, bouncing, or running.
Pulse is so important that it's present in all types of music, even if you can't hear it. Take this piece of classical music. Where's the rhythm? Where are the drums? Don't be misled. Rhythm in classical music is just as complex and vital as it is in other forms of music. It's just that the pulse is usually implied, not thrashed out. course, you could add drums if you really wanted to. Not an improvement, but it proves it has a beat.
There are many benefits to making your pulse implicit rather than explicit, for hiding it away in the minds of your players and your listeners rather than shoving it in their faces. One benefit is you can have music of great serenity and tranquility, to act as an antidote to exciting, adrenaline-pumping beats with loads of percussion. A relaxing walk along the seashore at sunset, for example, rather than a night out in Ibiza town.
A lot of classical music relies on the ticking clock in the listener's head. It exploits the spaces between the beats. Take this piece by Dvorak, played for us by Stephen Isserlis in his own arrangement. The pianist's right hand subtly tells us what the basic pulse is, with its flowing, ticking, short beats. Meanwhile, the cello solo plays a tune with one simple repeated rhythm. So rhythm, stripped down to its bare bones, has a choice of pulses and a choice of speeds. But this is only half the story. To understand how rhythm really works, we have to look at how these pulses are broken up and given different emphasis. In the next part, we're going to get a groove going by putting all these ingredients together.
The act of walking gave us a feel for a regular, repetitive beat, left, right, left, right. What's more, it instilled in Homo sapiens an instinct to divide those beats by multiples of 2, like our 2 feet. The minute you start subdividing the pulse is when you have real fun with rhythm.
You could take the basic walking pace and count 2 mini beats for each step, or 4 for each step. We tend to subdivide beats into 2, but we could in theory divide them into any number we wanted, and various other options have been tried over the centuries. One very popular option is to take 2 beats and divide them into smaller groups of 3. This pattern is one of the mainstays of Anglo-Celtic folk music. Its success in this part of the world may have something to do with its resonance with speech patterns and popular poetry. A limerick, for example, follows this exact same subdivision of beats.
There was a young lady from Ickenham who went on a bus trip to Twickenham. She drank too much beer, which made her feel queer, so she took off her boots and was sick in them. But the honest truth is that triple time patterns were always the offspring of double time. You can take even the most famous triple time tunes ever and hear the underlying 2s and 4s in their DNA. The Blue Danube Waltz, for example, sure enough goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But you can also hear the binary operating system going on behind it. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. There are many ways of exploiting the subdivision of beats, but the simplest way of all is to have them on top of each other, so you have beats of different length happening at the same time. So you might start with these 2 big long beats, these minims, and you divide them in half, and you'd get 4 of these crotchet beats. And then you divide them in half, and you get 8 of these quavers, and then smallest of all, down here, divide them in half, 16 little semiquavers. George Frederick Handel used this building block formula to great effect when he wrote an anthem for the coronation of George II in 1727, Zadok the Priest, a piece that has been heard at every British coronation since.
The opening introduction overlays the smallest units, known as semiquavers, with notes of exactly double the length, known as quavers. The repetition of these quavers and semiquavers over and over builds an incredible tension into the piece. When the choir finally starts singing, full majestic effect is achieved by having them sing in our slowest 2 units of time, the crotchet and minim units. Handel's Zadok the Priest introduction may change its chords, but the rhythm is pretty constant. In Philip Glass's opera Akhenaten, written 250 years later, we hear a similar pattern, but this time there is a subtle but significant difference. What's happening to Philip Glass's chugging along rhythm is a trick perfected by African musicians centuries ago. The pulse isn't changing, but as the pattern repeats and repeats, something else is changing. In musical jargon, we say that the accent is shifting. Accent is the 4th key element in rhythm, along with pulse, tempo, and the subdivision of the beat. So we better find out what it is and how it works.
Accent is all about which beats are important and which are not. The important ones get stressed, the others fit in meekly between.
Let me show you by using the running technique of Olympian athlete Abby Yayetipam as an example.
Because Abby's a human and not a machine, one of her legs is ever so slightly stronger than the other, so she leads off onto her right foot. Those 2 steps, right, left, are the nucleus of all our rhythm. Strong, weak, strong, weak. We've accented the first beat in a pair, and the minute we repeat the motion, we have created our first groove. So fundamental to our rhythmic instinct are these accents that we even imagine them when they don't actually exist. We can't help ourselves. Listen to this pulse, which could be the ticking of a clock. Listen for long enough and you'll find yourself organising this ticking into groups of 2 or 4. Your brain automatically gives one of the beats an emphasis by default. As it continues, you might even start to hear favourite tunes in your head ticking along to this pulse, with all their imported accents. But there's no accent or emphasis in this electronically generated beat at all. I deliberately fixed it so there wasn't. Your brain has superimposed a hierarchy on the beats. It has created virtual accents.
You can, if you like, take any collection of equal beats and give one or two of them special emphasis. So if you had 8 beats to play with, you could divide them into 2 groups of 4 and put an accent on the beginning of each, like Handel does in Zadok the Priest. While Philip Glass starts off his Akhenaten prelude with the same grouping of 4 as Handel, pretty soon he starts to change where that accent falls. So it turns into this. Later still to this. And finally, this. This trick of shifting accents was the rhythmic device of choice for the so-called minimalist composers in Western classical music in the second half of the 20th century. But this had been meat and veg for African musicians for thousands of years, where they might improvise for hours on end, making subtle and incremental changes to the accents every so often.
We've made a pulse, we've played around with its speed, we've subdivided it into smaller units, and we've given those units accents. Our voyage of rhythmic discovery is almost complete, but not quite. Subdividing beats and giving them accents has one important side effect that has given an extra charge to rhythm of excitement and energy over the centuries, but particularly in the 20th and 21st.
This side effect is called syncopation. It's music's red light district, where rhythm gets loose, playful, and mischievous.
Syncopation was a term that cropped up a lot in the 1920s during the jazz boom to describe jazz's new jerky rhythms. Though, believe it or not, both the term and the phenomenon had been around for ages. Syncopation is a musical sleight of hand, whereby you sneakily shift a beat slightly ahead of or slightly behind where you expect it to be. It makes music sound more fun, basically. Instead of sounding mechanical, mathematical, and machine-like, it makes things sound human and quirky. Here's a simple example from Bach. It's a short keyboard piece, an invention, and this is what it would sound like without its syncopation. But this is what Bach actually wrote.
My right hand, the upper part, is being deliberately delayed by a half beat all the way through the phrase. This, in its crudest form, is syncopation. Though it can be found in classical music, it's much more common in folk and popular music. In East European gypsy music, this type of syncopation is called estam. The accordion is half a beat behind the violin, playing catch-up, giving the music an urgent momentum. Because we develop a sense of steady rhythm as infants, you might think we'd rebel against a style of music that shifts the beat from where it really should be. But no, we seem to like the way syncopation plays around and teases our expectations. Rhythmic tricks like this excite and delight us.
Syncopation really came into its own, though, in America with the emergence of ragtime music in the late 19th century. Ragtime grew out of marching band music in around the 1890s, where the beat was steady and loud and bashed out by drums.
You can't mess about delaying beats in marching music unless you want your marchers to trip over themselves. But when musicians wanted to imitate popular marches on the piano alone, they had to make certain compromises.
So the umpa accompaniment that the tubas and the trombones took in the band had to be covered entirely by the left hand, like this.
Still, the beat is completely regular, no syncopations here. But the poor old right hand has to somehow cover not just the tune, but all the other frilly bits that the piccolos, clarinets and cornets share out amongst them. The solution was a piano style that did a bit of tune and a bit of frilly at the same time. And the only way it worked was by hopping from one to the other, dislocating or syncopating the rhythm in the process. An unintended jerkiness was thus added to the music. Everyone liked the jerkiness, the syncopation, so it stuck.
Ragtime's syncopation, just like Bach's or that of the gypsy istam, followed strict rules whereby each delay was of a predictable or identical length. But then something mysterious and magical happened. A new breed of music grew out of ragtime, and what distinguished it was that its syncopation wasn't predictable, but it became elasticated. This new breed of music was jazz, and the elastication of the syncopation, which took place over a period of about a decade, can, thanks to old recordings, be seen unfolding in front of our eyes. This type of syncopation came to be known as swing. Swing, in crude terms, is a kind of lag in the rhythm. The lead line almost gets left behind the main beat of the band. It's as if it's gradually loosening itself from the rigidity of the pulse. It's being cheeky, cocking a snoop at the authority of the drum beat. Indeed, mischievousness is one of the many seductive qualities that swing brings to music. A fascinating insight into the emergence of swing can be seen in the archive recordings of Fats Waller, one of the pioneers of jazz. He started out playing ragtime, not jazz. Here he is in 1923 on a piano roll he made himself, playing "Tain't Nobody's Business If I Do."
The music's syncopated and lively with all the energy of ragtime. Listen out for the way that the tune fits comfortably over the accompanying beat. But then Fats's playing started to get more jazzy. Here's a recording made 6 years later of his hit Ain't Misbehavin'. The right hand playing the tune is getting rebellious, dragging further and further behind the steady beat.
Finally, we can see the journey completed in 1938 at the height of the swing era proper with a recording of Honeysuckle Rose. The whole sound has thinned out. The melody line has become completely elastic, falling behind the beat as if it's being deliberately lazy. The accompaniment is all space and insinuation rather than explicit thump and steadiness. In short, his style has loosened up. It is swinging.
goodness knows, honeysuckle rose. When the best my flowers droop inside, and I know the reason why. You must sweeter goodness knows, honeysuckle rose.
All the syncopations we've encountered so far have taken a steady beat and messed about with what you're expecting it to do. But there's another type of syncopation that rhythm has up its sleeve, and it's devilishly sophisticated and devilishly exciting. Music has been immeasurably enriched by it, especially popular and dance music. In the next part, we'll find out what it is.
So far, all our syncopations have been made by shifting an accent or emphasis from one beat to another. But there's another species of syncopation which goes one step further. It takes a whole rhythm pattern with all its associated accents and superimposes it upon another. It's a technique called cross rhythm, and it's as old as the hills, or at least it is in Africa, where musicians have been doing it pretty much forever. Cross rhythm is the bit where drummers show off. It can seem unfeasibly difficult, like completing a jumbo Sudoku challenge while simultaneously ice skating, but the rewards can be thrilling. Cross rhythm is music's party trick, and we're going to find out how to do it.
We'll begin with a relatively straightforward cross rhythm, one that even a classically trained musician like me would be able to manage. It involves the superimposition of a 3-beat pattern over a 2-beat pattern in the same amount of time. So we start with our basic 2-beat pattern. Then we'll make 3 beats fit on top of them. Just for fun, I'm going to get Owen and Oliver to swap beats mid-flow.
You can see why our ancestors really liked this cross rhythm, can't you? It's dead flashy and it makes the rhythm really motor along. But you don't have to thwack it out on a pair of drums to feel the effect of this 3 against 2 pattern. Here it is in a piece by Brahms.
But superimposing 3 over 2 is child's play for an African drummer. For a start, it only involves 2 players. Expertly orchestrated good African drum patterns can involve half a dozen or more separate drum patterns on top of each other, involving a dozen or more players, and the results can be breathtakingly exciting. Overlaying of one rhythm pattern over another has been given a fresh slant in recent years with the development of one of the most widespread and influential of modern techniques, rap. In rap, a percussion section, usually electronic, lays down a basic ground pattern over which the spoken voice enters with its own often very complicated pattern whose rhythmic shape is determined solely by the choice of words.
Roaches in the back, junkies in the alley with the baseball bat. I tried to get away, but I couldn't get far, cause a man with the tow truck repossessed my car. Don't push me, cause I'm close to the edge. I'm trying not to lose my head. It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under. Standing on the front stoop, hanging out the window, watching all the cars go by, roaring as the breezes blow. A crazy lady living in a bag, eating out of garbage pails. Used to be a fag hag, such a dance to tango. Skipped the life and dango, a zircon princess seemed to lost her senses.
To all intents and purposes, the voice in rap is behaving like a percussion instrument. This can be demonstrated by taking a hip-hop vocal line and turning it into pure rhythm pattern. Hope is a hybrid song with a rapping verse from Twista and a gospel-inspired chorus from singer Faith Evans. When Twista begins his verse, the real rhythmic action and vitality is provided not by the drum kit playing the ground beat, but by the percussive energy of his voice.
I wish I could teach the world a scene, write some music and have them tripping off the joy I bring. I wish that we can hold hands, listen instead of dissing lessons from a grown man. And I wish the families that lack, but got love, get some stacks, brand new shotgun a lack, that's on dubs. And I
We can break this rhythm down to its essentials. Owen here will play us the rhythmic pattern of the ground beat. While Oliver will play the pattern Twista is rapping.
Then one day they could speak again. I wish that we only saw good news every time we look at CNN.
It's immediately obvious that the voices pattern is much more complicated than the backing track. Written down in standard Western notation, these kinds of cross rhythms are fiendishly hard to read at speed, which is one reason why you didn't tend to hear much of it in classical music.
But when classical composers did finally start to play around with layered rhythms in the 20th century, they went slightly bananas, a bit like someone discovering sex for the first time aged 60. The Russian composer Igor Stravinsky composed a ballet score in 1912, The Rite of Spring, about a prehistoric tribe sacrificing a virgin, in which he experimented with elaborate polyrhythms, that's multiple simultaneous beat patterns, much to the horror and alarm of his fellow European music lovers at the time. It's an absolute masterpiece, by the way. Our rhythmic toolbox is now just about full. We have our pulse, our tempo, our accents, our syncopations, and our cross rhythms. Now we owe it to ourselves to have a bit of fun with these tools. We need to go somewhere hot, steamy, and musical, where all these different rhythmic techniques have been mixed together in a magnificent melting pot of African, European, and Latin styles, to the 20th century's rhythmic hub, Cuba. At the very beginning of the 20th century, when ragtime and the blues were giving birth to jazz on mainland America, another form was becoming popular on the Caribbean island of Cuba. This form was called son, and from it has blossomed the most extraordinary range of dance and song types. Danson, rumba, guacanco, yambu, bossa nova, mambo, conga, cha-cha-cha, and eventually salsa. These forms were to have enormous influence, first in the Americas and then later through countless popular genres the whole world. What was it about Cuban rhythm then that was so seductive?
First, Cubans fused the sort of cross rhythms beloved of African drummers with European-style harmonies. Then they added their own local percussion instruments.
Second, there was a type of syncopation that originated in son, originally a simple peasant song style, that proved irresistible to late 20th century humankind. This syncopation is now so common in popular music that it's quite forgotten its roots in Cuba. What it is a kind of mirror image of swing in jazz. It hasn't got a name, but this is what it does. In jazz, we saw how Fats Waller, Louis Armstrong and others like to delay the melody a little to give it a degree of elasticity against the main beat in the drums or the bass. In Cuban son, the elasticity is in the other direction. It is anticipating the main beat, not delaying it.
I can show you how this works with 3 runners. Imagine the middle one is the pace setter, running along at a regular, fixed pulse. Then on the inside lane, runner 2 is trying to keep up with her, but is ever so slightly behind the pulse. Runner 2 is like swing in jazz. Runner 3, on the other hand, has a bit of Cuban blood in her. She's slightly ahead of the pace. She's the equivalent of the rhythm of Cuban son. In Cuban son, 2 things are pushing ahead, the melody and the bass line. It's generally agreed that the fact that the bass jumps ahead is one of the reasons why son has been the starting point for so many dance beats. It's almost as if it's pushing your feet to move. A famous example of son is El Guantánamo by Ignacio Piñero, one of the legendary pioneers of Havana son. In it, the melody and the bass line both anticipate the main beat. This is what the melody would sound like without the preemptive rhythm. And this is what it's like with it. Now I'm going to add the bass to that tune, played absolutely straight. But in the actual song, the bass is pushed as well, a bit like this.
Guantanamera, ¿por qué me desprecias? Guantanamera, ¿por qué me desprecias? Si tú bien sabes que soy el hombre que te quiere con pasión. Si tú bien sabes que soy el hombre que te quiere con pasión.
Most strong rhythms make people want to dance, but Cuban syncopation, where the bass jumps ahead of the beat, does it big time. The rhythmic sway of the music perfectly fits the sexy body-to-body movement of Cuban dance. Had all this been confined to the island of Cuba, with its population of 11 million, it wouldn't have been that big a deal. But in fact, billions of people the world over are now grooving to this Cuban beat, even if they don't know they are.
Sometime during the 1960s, the Latin American way of nudging melody spread like wildfire through popular song. Nowadays, the Cuban kind of pushed melody, where the vocal line is always slightly ahead of the beat, has become so normal in popular music that singing without it is the thing that sounds cheesy and weird, not the other way around. Imagine singing any of your favourite pop songs without the Latin push. This is Killing Me Softly with His Song, made famous in the 70s by Roberta Flack and by the Fugees in the 90s. First we'll hear it without the Cuban-inspired syncopation.
I heard he sang a good song, I heard he had a smile, and so I came to see him and listen for a while.
Now hear it with the gentle push ahead of the pulse. The difference is striking.
I heard he sang a good song, I heard he had a smile, and so I came to see him and listen for a while. And there he was, that young boy, a stranger to my eyes, strumming my pain with his fingers, singing my life with his words, killing me softly with his song, killing me softly with his song, telling my whole life with his words, killing me softly with his song.
In the next part, we're going to end our journey with a lesson in rhythm from one of the greats of popular music, Stevie Wonder.
Latin American influence on modern pop music hit something of a high in the 1970s with the work of one of the world's greatest living songwriters. Stevie Wonder, between 1972 and 1976, produced a series of iconic albums in which he brilliantly combined Latin rhythms with African American soul music. This body of work, whilst embraced enthusiastically enough by the record-buying public, had an even deeper impact on other musicians, since it's now impossible to imagine modern black music without Wonder's masterly hand behind nearly all the grooves you are likely to hear in contemporary music, rap included.
Makes a deal with a smile, knowing all the time that his lies a mile. He's Mr. Know-It-All.
In Don't You Worry About a Thing from the album Innovisions, Stevie Wonder offers us a masterclass in rhythm, acknowledging his debt both to Cuban and Brazilian dance forms and also to the black music that grew out of jazz, swing and soul. All of the rhythmic techniques we've encountered so far, from pulse to syncopation, can be found in this one song. The song begins with a series of apparently disjointed and irregular piano beats and chords. They're short and punchy, so there are obvious gaps between the sounds. Before the drums come in, the pulse is implicit, like it was in the Dvorak cello piece we heard earlier. Stevie Wonder is playing with the fact that both he and us, the listeners, have an instinctive sense of where that pulse should be, even if it's inaudible. I'm going to get my metronome to tap out that hidden pulse. And now I'm going to put the piano chords back in. Stevie Wonder's doing is choosing his stabbed moments very carefully. I'm now going to show you where he gets his pattern from. First, we have to subdivide that basic hidden pulse so we get 2 new shorter beats for each one. All of Stevie's apparently random stabbed piano chords land on one of those shorter beats. Behind me are 16 lights that represent those new short beats, and they'll only light up if a piano chord lands right on top of them.
Gradually, as the intro to the song progresses, more and more of these short beats are activated as more and more layers of percussion start to use them up. We've subdivided the beat. Now the piano stabs aren't alone, they're acting as accents in the landscape. Each time the opening pattern repeats, another percussion instrument joins in, thickening the texture and creating a wash of cross rhythms.
Finally, when the vocal enters, the melody pushes every single note just ahead of the beat, true Cuban style. Without the Latin push, this is what the tune would sound like. Everybody's got a thing, but some don't know how to handle it. With the little anticipation, though, Stevie Wonder turns it instead into a steamy and lilting lullaby.
Everybody's got a thing, but some don't know how to handle it. Always reaching out in vain, just taking the things not worth having. But don't you worry about a thing. Don't you worry about a thing, mama. 'Cause I'll be standing on the side when you check it out.
I'm absolutely sure that Johann Sebastian Bach, back in 18th century Saxony, himself a great lover of syncopation, of layering, of shifting accents and hypnotic repeated patterns, would have loved this. After all, what human being alive can resist the lure of a great rhythm?